Welcome to OSHA Safe Plus Sound Week Day 2. We're going to try to do, we've been doing a shorter version of our webinar every day for 7 days because, even doing that, we will not barely have scratched the surface on safety topics, both with respect to culture and creating a culture that makes safety better at your dairy farm, and also with respect to some of the mechanics around it. So I'm going to point you to 2 books around culture safety because they're just really cool. Though, did you know The Mind Cannot Refuse a Question is actually from the bottom book, One Small Step Can Change Your Life. And if you've done any of the lean jargon, Kaizen is one of the jargon, and it means good micro change. It means a really little tiny change that has a good result, and then you build on and you build on and you build on, and before you know it, you've made huge changes. And the book has some examples on that. Dr. Rabmeier has also written an actual business book about Kaizen, Spirit of Kaizen. But this one's about Kaizen in your personal life, and he talks about the concept other than how tiny he starts you. Like for an exercise program, you stand on the treadmill and drink your coffee and read your newspaper for 5 minutes a day for a month. I could do that. And that's the whole point. He's the one who introduces this question of, did you know the mind cannot refuse a question? So if you start saying to yourself, what's the smallest change I could make, that we could make, that would make my job safer, or improve the process, or improve safety for your teammates? If you keep asking that question, your subconscious, which is your smart brain, it processes like millions of characters per second. What we think of as our smart brain, we think our prefrontal cortex thinking brain is our smart brain, but that's only a couple thousand characters per second. If you keep asking it, the subconscious brain will say, this must be important. I'll start lobbing answers back up, and then you've got to give it time to give you the answers. I call it my what have you got for me today brain time. I ask myself that every morning, and I have my silly little index cards nearby that I can jot down whatever comes up. And Einstein used to say, why do my best ideas come to me in the morning when I'm shaving? And it's that time that you've put your brain in neutral and you've given this time and space for the subconscious to lob up those questions. Culture Code is a real. Daniel Coyle also wrote a really interesting book called The Talent Code about the science of disproportionate excellence, how to build disproportionate excellence, which was fun. But in Culture Code, he talks about that one of the key things to get team members to engage is they have to have that culture of safety. They have to believe that it's safe for them to contribute. And he also early on talks about they actually planted this bad apple ringer into meetings. And in 80% of the meetings they put him in, he played tired, he played lazy, and he played something else, discouraged, I think. And he could get the whole rest of the meeting to follow his emotional state. But there was one set of people, and he couldn't get them to change. And it tells you the mechanics of how they responded to his bad energy and how they turned the ship to get people to stay involved. Other thing about culture safety that's an awesome book is in terms of communication. It gives you the example, I think in chapter 5, we'll put the link in the notes, of it was a United flight from Denver to Chicago, and one of their engines blows itself apart. I mean, just shrapnel. The engine is shrapnel. And it cut all the hydraulic lines. They have no navigation equipment left. And the pilot and the co-pilot, it turns out that the guy sitting in seat 1B is a person who trained pilots on emergency response for United. And he tells the flight attendant, tell them I'm back here. Do they want me to come up? And they do. And this talks you through, I listen to audiobooks, so I hear this. It's just amazing. And it talks you through the communication interaction among those 3 people and how interaction needs to take place when you're in that kind of a really crisis situation. And they landed the plane. It did catch fire, and they lost less than half of the passengers, I want to say. And National Transportation Safety Board and the FAA ran simulations of that. They ran 28 simulations of that event, and they were never able to even get it to an airport. The thing crashed. So It's one of my favorite things to hear about. Another example is Captain Sully Sullenberger. You probably remember seeing him land a plane on the Hudson River, which is not where planes are supposed to land. And in this case, it was high reliability organizations, aircraft pilots, aircraft carriers, firefighters, emergency responders. But two things that they do differently than the rest of us until we learn that that's how we're supposed to do things is the two bottom bullets on this. They prepare differently. They give they really take weak signals very seriously, and they listen to operations, both in terms of preparation, and they listen to operations in terms of response. A lot of other organizations defer to the guy with the biggest title, or who's been there the longest, or who has the biggest office and the fanciest desk. And successful responses like this one, turns out Captain Sullenberger had 20,000 hours of flying. His co-pilot had 20,000 hours of flying. And Sullenberger had actually been teaching gliders for 20 years. So he was able to coordinate his landing on the Hudson pretty amazingly. Now we're going to go to the practical mechanical equipment injuries. These are the most common injuries on dairy farms. They have the highest number of fatalities. In 2017, there were 33 fatalities per year at dairy farms, and of those, 13 were from mechanical equipment. Turns out that a third to half of fatal injuries are a result of these mechanical injuries, and 5 to 10% of non-fatal injuries, so still significant. And so this is going to be a really quick and easy. What are some of the most common? And as part of your OSHA planning, you'll go look at what are all the hazards on your farm. But common mechanical equipment injuries, the ones I've seen the most commonly are the rotating PTO shaft injuries, being crushed by equipment. We'll cover being crushed by animals was the previous OSHA mini webinar. Tractor rollout overs, and what's the biggest hazard depends on what area of the dairy farm you work in and what kind of dairy farm you run, because different pieces of equipment will have different hazards, and different areas you work may be exposed to different kinds of equipment, and different dairy farms will have different pieces of equipment. Jessica?
Yeah, for sure. It doesn't matter if you are milking with a rotary parlor, parallel parlor, or a robot parlor. You just have to think about the injuries that all of these types of farms can cause these injuries.
And the picture here you see is a tractor that has rolled down the hill. I'm actually told that at my horse farm, my old Yanmar tractor had indeed rolled down the hill sideways. Never heard if anybody was hurt. I'm assuming not. But I was always taught straight up and straight down on hills with tractors, and you put it in the gear you're going to be in all the way down the hill, and you do not. I have a horror story about that too. I remember, if you've been around it for a while, you've got some horror stories. But I was out on the manure spreader. It was dark, pitch dark, and I was on the Yanmar, and I thought I put the clutch in. I thought I put the brake. I thought I stepped on the brake, and I stepped on the clutch, and we were going down a hill at a very high rate of speed. Luckily, no injury. That's one of those near miss that we want you to learn to report and do planning around. Also had a rotating shaft. I had a sweater get caught in a rotating shaft of a manure spreader, and luckily I was with somebody, and they had the presence of mind to turn the key off. We'll get to the be planning what you would do if all the things that could go wrong, and what you would do if that would happen. And to this day, I will not walk on that side of a manure spreader, whether the shaft is rotating or not. That was one of my scariest horse farm experiences. And then prevention. So like I say, the hazards specific to your farm, you should have been trained. They should have figured out what the hazards are, or you should have figured out what the hazards are if that's what your job, and come up with specific training for each of those hazards. But some of the commonalities is don't use equipment unless you're trained. Follow the SOP and the manufacturer's guidance. Having everyone wear reflective vests when they're around equipment, whether they're around, even if they're around cows, because then if you saw a vest on the ground, you would know that a reflective vest should not be on the ground. Let's go check this out. And each type of hazard could be its own class. I put the picture here, the cow with the vest, which I think is just funny. But it turns out that in the UK, they wanted the cows to have to wear protective vests at night so that if they got out, drivers wouldn't hit them and have accidents. And to that I thought, maybe keep your cows from getting out, but that's me.
Then you can find your cows at night.
You can find your cows at night.
And more if you have black cows.
And that's right, because the black cow, like a black horse on a dark night, it's pretty hard. Anyway, thank you for attending our OSHA 1+1 Safety Week webinar, and we would love to hear any suggestions, comments, and any wonderful case examples you've got, especially your near-miss horror stories. Thanks for being here.